So I watched The French Dispatch, and it was a splendid surprise. Not that I expected Wes Anderson to make a bad film, I haven't disliked one of his yet. It's just that it currently stands as a more divisively received film of his. But walking out of it, I think it's one of his strongest works and might even shoot higher when I rewatch it, which I definitely will have to. Then there's this review. It's been going slow. Thanks to the film's insistence on good writing, I've been pressured into wanting to write better, and so brainstorming what and how to review this thing has been onerous, strenuous, obstreperous? Hard. It's been hard. Let's begin with the man himself. Wes Anderson. A segment in his own right, because we all knew what this movie was going to be like, having his name on it. You saw the trailer, you saw how it looks. It's Wes Anderson, case closed. His style is a trusted brand, instantly recognizable, unable to be plagiarized. A kind of Ivy League country club, five-star hotel aesthetic. Maybe that's what riles people up about him, the status implicit to these old-world establishments. A guy championing and positioning himself within these outfits really isn't doing much to avoid the dreaded death knell of modern discourse. The P word. Pretentious. But the hate people project onto his style is getting absurd. Like, it fills you with rage that a director in a visual medium has a recognizable and fully developed style. Also, there's a lack of trust in how self-aware Anderson is about these privileged lifestyles and eras he's referencing. Yet all of his films have a kind of self-reflective satire to them and openly make fun of these prestigious people. It's just as he does with military forces, which also pop up regularly in his work. They're toy soldiers, blank, thoughtless brutes that nevertheless undergo the same puppet theater choreography as the nanciest Nancy. His films feel like the men for whom lapel pins and cologne, pocket squares and shoe polish are of the utmost importance towards his countenance and comportment. Doubt comes from the fact that we know in real life these kinds of people are insufferable to be around. And Wes isn't part of some sinister scheme to bring back the boys' club. Give him some credit. His tone is very self-deprecating, his characters beneath their surface of prestige are immature babies. The simple pleasure of, for example, work offices that are more like homes for cigars and cocktails is celebrated as just that. Simple, neat-minded pleasures. Humor comes from exploring how these markers have been used as facades for simple-minded people to project sophistication and authority. To phrase it one way, towing the line between white culture and white man's burden. I'll say, though, that besides the ones where they're all animals, French Dispatch easily felt the most diverse of his films so far. The next Andersonianism on the chopping block is his love of toppings. The functionless decorations, garnishes, calligraphy and typography, confectionery of things. He lines out the items of each moment like proudly showing off his old trophies. Rather than being weak, shameful, or effete, the building up of our surroundings takes self-understanding, sensibility, and yes, effort. If you want a better world, we're told to go out and fight someone for it, when we could put equally sizable effort into making things nice ourselves. It's a task we should pride ourselves in investing in. Why? To be nice. Does it have to be more? Like the cliche of the grizzled camo-wearing cowboy who's bewildered that the suave metrosexual guys fuck way more than him.
I go to bed with all my friends.
For further reference on what the fuck I'm talking about, let me point you to this Kieran J. Callanan song. And if you are desperate for him to inject his style with some fresh, unrestrained air, we already got Tyler the Creator.
Floopy goober motherfucker.
So what has Wes brought to the table now, if he is indeed further refining and experimenting with this style? Slyly integrated miniatures, inconstant spills of black and white amid pastel colors, changing aspect ratios, and a surprise animated sequence, a beautifully streamlined New Yorker sketch in motion, but primarily imagination. I was astonished at how this acutely detailed story came to be without any tether. I mean, eventually I realized there is a kind of link in The New Yorker, but how useful is that in storyboarding a cinematic work? It doesn't lend it to any conventional sense, so Wes just threw convention out the window, making all frosting an oops all marshmallow cereal of a movie that fits quite harmoniously with his partiality for pleasantry. So if you're thinking of watching this movie, you might, like me, ask, what is The French Dispatch? It is a random assortment of scenarios, filmmaking techniques, and performances that plays for the sake of play itself, full of inspiration and deceptively veritable but wholly fiction. I wanted to look into what inspired Wes as he made this. I get the sense there are real-world references in the idiosyncratic characters and chapters. The French Dispatch is a love letter, or obituary, to a bygone world of print. So the film takes on the spirit of the written word and the writers who erect it. But the heart of the writer is a prickly thing, replete with sardonic wit, cosmopolitan airs, and a strict blasé attitude, the maintenance of a journalistic and judicious distance. Writer-subject relationships become the focus, as well as the ties between writer and editor, art and business, reader and author. In short, French Dispatch is very much about the processes of things. And what better fit to that than Wes Anderson? Surely you can envision in your mind already some montage of his instructing on how to make a courtisan au chocolat, or heist the headmaster's secret deed, probably by laying out all the pieces in quaint overhead displays. That the movie. The hard sell is that you aren't going in knowing what the story is. The movie brings the story to you. Like a paper curates stories for its readers, showing them new things and pushing open their periphery. The main purpose and motivation behind the French Dispatch, as stated multiple times, is to bring the world to Kansas. And that sentiment of home being too small, yet the origin for all greatness, reverberates throughout the story. A paper, like all media, can be the gateway for anybody to be exposed to the whole of the world, its infinite novelties, personalities, and here particularly, excellence of self-expression. The center to it all is the character who stays on the furthest corners, founder and editor Arthur Howitzer Jr., played by Bill Murray. You see, a lot of the fun in how these stories are told is that with the editor-writer relationship, disagreements on how a story should be told are part of the process. And you get a meta-level sense that the overarching feel, the layer of consistency to the multitude of passages you're experiencing, is the editor, and on a further level, Wes Anderson. It reminded me of how Camera Person, a film by Kirsten Johnson, builds around that invisible but palpable element of the person working the gears. That even in the pursuit of neutrality, subjectivity always intrudes, but that's what makes art interesting. You just have to embrace it. The credits offer a reading list of the writers, editors, et al. Who inspired the cast. It extends a hand to those unexposed to this field, ready to be inspired. The people journaling, drifting on their own way while the world keeps turning, ever in unrest. Wes invites us into this space, the haven provided by the Foreign Bureau of the French Dispatch for these writers. It translates the feel of a newspaper into film. Charming and pleasant, droll in the face of the melodramas of life. It argues something against the notion that intellectualism isn't quote-unquote real life. And tied up in that is journalism, which is seen as if it's all tabloid, all fake news. But there has always been, and still is, the group of artists who do what they do because they care. Many of the characters in French Dispatch embody this cold, critical exterior that, in actuality, cares a lot about people. It cares about knowing, it cares about the world. It cares about the truth. This is most obvious in Léa Seydoux' character, who is hilariously stone in mannerism, tone, and body, but whose actions toward Del Toro's character become the marmoreal splashes of his passionate art. And I encourage the incorporation of other arts into film. To me, cinema has always been the assimilator of other art forms, uniquely able to accommodate and reshape them in its service. Actors work to replicate human behaviors, but how many times is dance, architecture, painting, the culinary, or writing the dominant element to how things look and feel? One way he emulates a New Yorker magazine is in the nostalgic, cozy cover art, which invites you in each edition. Many of his establishing shots have that. I don't know where to put this exactly, so let's just talk about the Frenchness of the French Dispatch. Just as voluminous are the references to French films and styles, many I don't get but feel are references because it's so overt. Tati, Godard, Renoir, the Nouvelle Vague down to silent era mime and tableau. Ennui, the city in which the French Dispatch is located, is a pastiche of France. Its subconscious identity as it sits in Anderson's head. A kind of fictional postcard. I think he's really starting to see France as his home, and Wes is expressing how he feels as an outsider to France who's gone to it and made it his home. Another noteworthy aspect of French Dispatch is the size of the casting. All the regulars have roles, as well as some new A-list actors like Benicio del Toro and Timothée Chalamet, who has a line about cosmic space travel that's doubly comedic after having just seen Dune. I've officially noticed a recurring element in Anderson films that I don't know what to do with, and that is older women being physically romantic with young men. I don't know if Wes had a tryst with some old librarians back in his day or something, I just thought I'd mention that. Each section, concocted as a journalist's subject and the pages it runs, has two sides: the subjects of the story and the writer witnessing and recording it. The actual involvement of the writers varies, with some often appearing silently in the background. The first passage goes to Owen Wilson, a sort of on-the-ground reporter with a beret who bicycles along the sordid patches of ennui, giving us an introduction to Anderson's fictionalized setting. It's the breeziest one, a humorous tone-setting aperitif to the heavier stories ahead. Sazerac is sprung from Joseph Mitchell, whose Chronicle of New York by way of its rats caused a stir in journalism. His characters, of course, the way Mitchell used them to explore a disappearing time and place that he preserved in prose. The march of mortality, the serendipity of life, the fickle humor of our condition, the power of good food and drink. Also, it came out that Mitchell regularly fabricated or altered parts, quotes, or whole characters for his supposedly nonfiction writing. So what we know about the times and places he represented is more a murky melange of fiction and reality. He did this with the goal of hitting upon truths based on facts, just without loyalty to being factual.
Sazerac?
Impossible to fact check. He changes all the names and only writes about hobos, pimps, and junkies.
These are his people.
Next, arts. Tilda Swinton is the writer, putting on a ridiculous manner of speech and keeping her hands at a latex-gloved distance from her subject. Benicio del Toro's psychopathic convicted murderer turned genius artist. Throw in Adrian Brody as a slimy art dealer, squeezing an artistic revolution from the felon, and we are bursting with quirk. Lots of black humor, a standout character from Sidu, an iron-jawed, stone-eyed prison guard who winds up being the artist's muse and model. Also, just like in Grand Budapest, Adrian Brody gets to centerpiece big moments with an uncharacteristically dropped F-bomb or two. Next chorus, politics. Frances McDormand is the battled old journalist chronicling a youth's rebellion led by Timothée Chalamet, her main subject, and Lena Kudry, his motorcycle helmet wearing at all times girlfriend, rival, frenemy. Much of McDormand's character comes from Mavis Gallant. Her icy precision, isolation, and sardonic wit. She sort of fits into an old maid archetype, as stated by other characters multiple times. So her connection to the youth that she's exploring, both cynically in their short-sighted revolution, which, might it be mentioned, began because they wanted boys access to the girls' dormitories, but also respect for their drive, their need to make the world a better place, to maybe fix the mistakes of their parents. It's the chronicle of revolution revolving. Finally, we have the food. The story is about a kidnapping, police firefight, and poisoning scheme. Jeffrey Wright plays another one of the best characters in the film, Roebuck Wright, whose intellectual candor is pieced out amongst a TV interview, the inner framework of an assignment on a chef gone awry, and his work at the French Dispatch. He has a stolid air very much belonging to the Anderson realm that communicates to us the deeper emotional themes of the movie. Knowing the hardships of racism and homophobia at home, his eventual discovery in France is a watershed moment. He's a combo of James Baldwin and A.J. Liebling. Liebling contributes his omnivorous approach to topics, as Roebuck starts with a book review yet writes about anything between that and food. Baldwin provides the more meditative, serious reflections on identity, voiced from Roebuck but speaking for the whole of the French Dispatch. I mention characters by their actors' names because that's kind of the conceit of it all. He can fill the screen with household names knowing it's openly fictitious. You aren't latching onto the characters as individuals, but feeling the actors playing these amalgamations of real-life figures. Both thinking of the real film cast and the fictional French Dispatch cast, it portrays the warmth of family. And in his later films, Wes seems to be focusing on found families, as Cousteau becomes a father for Zero, and the French Dispatch becomes a solace, a home for its expat writers. I was feeling just above the middle for a long while, but in actuality the vibe of it was silently simmering, warming me up until by the end I was filled with content. It's like being served up a full-course meal, all devised and prepped by the chef at your trust. It's enjoyable, talented, and filled with great filmmaking. The structure will either build upon itself if you're into it, or further alienate you if you're tapping out. Nearing the end, it also gets more vocal about what its overarching themes may be, though the chapters are never truly conducted towards sharing a strong central connection, which would have made it easier to take as an anthology. But by the end, and thinking about it, I do believe on a rewatch it will solidify itself more consistently. It's dense, and might become even better as the thread between each chapter is more understood. Also, I wasn't getting a proper viewing because my buddy Regal Theaters, everybody, that's Regal Cinemas, projected the film on a screen with a big blue circle of discoloration in the center. Because, you know, the color palette in a Wes Anderson movie totally doesn't matter. I'm giving The French Dispatch an 8 out of 10, likely to go up to a 9. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go vomit up the library of unused words, adjectives, and descriptors used in every review of Wes Anderson, because I've been writing this thing for weeks, and I just need to get it out of my system. Twee, posh, primp, preen, baroque, prose, filigree, whimsy, preppy, endearing, nostalgic, quaint, kickshaw, symmetric, regimented, eccentric, odd, quaint, antiquated, charming, fanciful, lavish, petite, pettifogger, fizzgig, persiflage, gallivanting, auditorium,